let's talk about priorities within the context of an election. Meaning, as you go about your race and as you're trying to win that race, you are presenting an argument to the American public. Now, there are all sorts of things that go beyond just the argument in and of itself. The public can agree with you on any particular idea. The catch becomes whether your argument is going to exceed the person who you're running against, and whether or not the public buys your theory of the case and buys you making that theory of the case as opposed to the other person. Now, Donald Trump was able to beat Hillary Clinton with this kind of populist right message, whereas Hillary Clinton was basically same old establishment Democrat that has basically got the public into the quagmire it is now with the other Republican Party. The thing is, the public wanted something fundamentally different. They wanted something fundamentally different when they were voting for Obama. They wanted something fundamentally different when they went into Trump. And they knew they didn't get their hope and change. If you think back for a moment to the election between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, what happened? Boris Johnson ran on this notion that I am freedom and democracy itself, and you said you wanted to leave with the referendum. I, Boris Johnson, will be the guy to take you out. The other ditherer over there won't. Now, Corbyn tried to make an argument about the NHS being up for sale. It was going to be up for sale. And tried to make an argument that he was going to have some kind of weird in-betweener dance between the raindrops on Brexit. Whereas the public wanted are you going to leave? Are you going to stay? Corbyn was like, I'm going to do a little bit of both. That was summarily rejected. Even in areas that voted Labour for God knows how long, I was shocked by that response because I was shocked that Corbyn would take that cadence in an election that clearly, unquestionably, was about Brexit. When Jeremy Corbyn would have this position of whether you're going to stay or leave, and what he would say? He would say, well, I'm going to send people who don't believe in Brexit to the EU to get a deal, and then I'm going to come back and put that deal up for a vote. What the public knew is that you weren't being serious. And that the moment that you say, I'm going to put it up for a vote, you're basically asking for a second referendum when the first one had already been decided and not implemented. The point of that election wasn't the NHS, even though the NHS was important. The point of that election was Brexit. That was the point. Now, move to the US for a moment. And we have been racked by protests that have been going on ever since George Floyd was murdered. Those protests have evolved apparently from just specific items on issues of race and policing to items on issues of poverty, issues of the unemployment that we have, issues of the domestic economy, those type of things. Well, that's an evolution of the argument against the government. And that evolution of the argument against the government, the public basically don't believe in Trump. They look at the protests and say those protests are valid. On top of the protests being valid, you have the second issue of COVID-19. And COVID-19 having, 160,000 people dead. I think there were over 1,200 dead yesterday, over 1,000 dead yesterday. And millions infected. Those millions infected, even though they didn't die, are still going to have to deal with medical bills. In one case, a guy's bill was over $1 million that they are going to have to deal with. Many of these people are out of jobs. Many of these people were already in low-paying jobs. The majority of this country was living paycheck to paycheck before this even started. The majority of this country, or up to the majority of this country, close to half, was only making less than 50 minimum wage or a poverty wage. That's a problem. Your country is in dire straits before this happened, and that level of inequality and that level of desperation only skyrocketed after, especially with the response of the government. Now, if you are running in an election campaign and your name is Donald Trump, what's your focus? What's the thing that gets you over the hump? What's the thing that keeps you in the race, that keeps the polling close, that gives you and your people a chance to actually bring back the presidency? And if you're not talking about that thing, are you hurting yourself? And if your name is Trump, what should you be doing right now to elevate your chances of beating, quote unquote, sleepy Joe Biden? I will tell you what it is not. Arguing that Joe Biden is against God is not going to do it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I'm not going to keep this video long, but I thought this was so ridiculous, so over the top, so unhinged, that it just fundamentally misses the point. I don't know who is talking to Donald Trump in these briefings where he needs to kind of go out and have his campaign stuff, but whether he realizes it or not, his job as president is intrinsically linked to what happens in the country and whether or not the American public puts him back in that office. And he is missing the boat. There's one area he's nailing it on. The other one, not so much. And you need to hear more of the latter as opposed to what you're about to hear. Now, let's hear Trump speech against Joe Biden in Ohio. Listen to what he says. And I'm going to ask you, is this an effective line of attack on Joe Biden?
Do things that nobody ever would ever think even possible because he's following the radical left agenda. Take away your guns, destroy your Second Amendment, no religion, no anything, hurt the Bible, hurt God. He's against God, he's against guns, he's against energy, our kind of energy. I don't think he's going to do too well in Ohio. Do things that nobody ever would ever.
Think about what he's saying for the moment. Think about what he's saying for the moment. He's arguing that Joe Biden hurt God. Hurt God. Then he changes it to he's against God, he's against guns, and he's against our type of energy. No idea what our type of energy is. I guess he means maybe nuclear. Look, dude, you have 162,000 people dead on your watch. You have millions of people infected on your watch. You have protests where shit was being burnt down on your watch. You hid in a bunker while Washington, D.C. went up in flames. All of this is on your watch. The inability for the using the Defense Production Act to basically make supplies and whatnot. The inability to deal with scientific information and make opinion and judgments based on that scientific information as opposed to looking out for the best interests of the owner class or the 1%. I mean, after all, those are the people who you dumped all that money into the hands of while giving a pittance to the American public. Arguing that Joe Biden is against God while the entire world, and particularly your country, is in flames in large part from your inability to do your job properly is not going to get you bang for your buck. This is talking about a waste and talking about fundamentally missing the point of what is taking place around you right now. The argument that this is entirely an issue of testing. We do too much testing. And so Trump wanted to lower out the number for testing in the bill, the next bill. That's if there is indeed a next bill. Well, that's obscene. And when you're presented with that over and over again, presented with reality itself, and you deny that reality, well, 30% of the public may believe you, but the overwhelming majority disbelieves you. And because they disbelieve you, they consider you a liar. They consider you a liar beforehand. But the difference is there are levels of lying. Lying about your crowds when you come out of a presidential inauguration is one thing. Lying about how a disease is propagating and the fact that that disease is indeed propagating and that the material conditions of that disease is indeed getting worse and that you and your ineffectiveness in that job is in large part responsible. It's not to say that nobody would have died from COVID-19, depending on the president. The greatest president on the planet would have still lost people from COVID-19. The catch and the question becomes, how much loss of life would that person have ensured that the hospitals and that the medical facilities had the things that they needed, either ventilators or protective equipment? Meaning there are things in your job as president that you can do to mitigate the worst aspects of that particular disease. And it is lunacy to believe that Trump did any of those things in real measure. Think of the governments that have the worst cases of this. Bolsonaro in Brazil, UK, meaning Boris Johnson, Modi in India, Donald Trump in America, those tend to be right-wing governments. And those right-wing governments had a particular point of view that looked at human life as mattering less. And as such, their actions and their priorities went along with that point of view of human beings mattering less. Here's the catch, though. It doesn't necessarily mean that Donald Trump losing this is a foregone conclusion. And I think that's the thing that needs to be understood. Trump is still president of the United States. Joe Biden is running in his basement. And as long as Joe Biden doesn't necessarily have to give a strong statement, an affirmative argument that can basically rely on people voting for him for the shame vote just because they don't necessarily want to vote for Trump. Well, you can do that if the guy is failing miserably. And if that guy is indeed failing miserably because he's talking about things that are not necessarily the focus of what the public is, then yeah, you can skate pretty easily by not necessarily engaging and not necessarily being that much involved in the process. Trump, however, losing is not a foregone conclusion. He's the president of the United States. And as president of the United States, he has vast powers and latitude. And some of those powers, if used for good ends, or at the very least what the public perceives as good ends, could improve his standing. Meaning, if Donald Trump came out and did what Larry Kudlow is saying that Trump is going to do. Listen to this. Okay, initially Kudlow was going to give his point of view, but now we're having trouble getting Kudlow to make his piece. Come on, Kudlow. Come on, come on, come on. Okay, Kudlow is being... Let's try this again. Yeah, let's try to flip this one more time to see if we can get this to work. But I played the video the other day with Meadows, chief of staff, basically coming out saying, Trump is serious about it. Trump will push through an executive order dealing with the evictions or, for the matter, dealing with the unemployment insurance. Well, Kudlow is basically threatening the same thing. Now, let's see. Here we are. Kudlow is basically threatening the same thing. Now, understand what this means. Part of the Democrats' leverage is trying to basically say we have a $3 trillion bill and that we have all of these other items that we want to get associated. Meaning, if the president wants to salvage the economy in some way, if he wants to keep it afloat by us being able to come to some kind of deal on money that we want to put into it, then the president needs to also give us our priorities. And Democrats, feeling very comfortable at this fact that the pressure is mostly on Trump since the public blames Trump for the issue of the COVID-19 virus, well, they believe that they have a little bit more leeway to basically wait. The president has the presidency. The Republicans have the Senate. It is their responsibility to get something passed, and that's the way the public is going to look at it. Democrats believe that, and so their thought is we can play politics at this moment. If the Republicans don't want to act, this country is going to fall off of a cliff that much more than it already has, and Trump will be blamed for it, making it that much easier for Joe Biden to win the election. If we do agree to a deal and there's any kind of improvement, well, that makes our situation and our argument that much worse, and it makes the case for Trump that much better. Trump, if he does indeed goes through with this notion of passing through an executive order, and again, I am unclear on the powers of the presidency in regards to doing something like this. If Trump does that, then he undermines and undercuts the argument that Democrats are making, and not just undercuts it, removes their leverage in many respects, in trying to get some of the items that they themselves want. It comes off as a win. Not just a win from the optic standpoint, a win also from the material circumstances. That's indeed if the money is used for good ends and not necessarily just another giveaway. On top of that being a giveaway, it also undermines the Democrats' ability to basically have any kind of leverage in the negotiation between Trump and them on the bill coming up. Let's hear Kudlow.
There's a whole variety of issues and federal powers that are at the president's disposal, and he will use them. You can bet on it.
All right, let's talk about spending, if you can. Trillions of dollars have been spent already on COVID relief. The Democrats want to spend trillions more than Republicans do, but we still have over $1 trillion waiting to be spent in the coffers. And actually, Judy Woodruff, I know her for suggesting that there's money left over. But is it not true that there's over $1 trillion that has yet to be spent?
Well, I can't give you the exact number, but I think you're in the right ballpark. Judy Woodruff and her husband, Al Hunt, are very dear friends of mine. I was on Judy Woodruff's PBS NewsHour last evening talking about this very subject. The questions here are part legal and part fiscal, whether the legal counsels and the Office of Management and Budget can see their way to repurposing some of the monies that weren't spent, or else just to add them on to various relief and assistance programs that we're all looking at. So yes, that gives us a lot of resources to work with. I just can't say this enough. People should not believe the president is bluffing on using his executive authority. He is not bluffing. And since we can't seem to get a deal done with the other team right now, he will take his executive authority to the fullest.
And he's not bluffing on TikTok either, coming out with a deadline for them to sell.
Kudlow, again, signaling that today or tomorrow, at least that's what the indication said, it's supposed to be by today, that if they can't reach a deal with Democrats, that Trump is indeed going to use executive authority to deal with the eviction issue and to deal with the issue of the unemployment insurance. That's a positive step. If you're going to have an argument about what you're going to focus on, that needs to be your focus. This Joe Biden hates God stuff is stupid. The thing that makes sense, though, is to focus on your main liability. And Sanders versus Biden, the main liability was electability. That was the focus of that particular election contest. If you weren't focused, at least from the standpoint of anybody else other than Biden, on the notion that Biden is either unelectable or will have a harder time to get elected, as opposed to you when your name is Bernie Sanders, when the public is questioning and has questions about your candidacy, you need to be focused on electability. Joe Biden can focus on anything he wants. You, as Sanders, need to focus on electability because that's what the audience is judging you by. That was the point of that election. Every policy discussion, if you remember, Sanders won the policy argument. The issue wasn't policy. The issue was who gets Trump out of office. That was the point of that fight. If you weren't having that fight, you weren't really fighting at all. Well, same thing with this election. Donald Trump can't run away from the COVID-19 thing. It is clear, it is obvious that this is something that is there. I mean, the death totals are there for you to see pretty much anywhere you turn. Nor can you entirely get rid of this notion of the racial issue that is brought up with all of these people at the protests. And those protests will likely only get worse with more and more people being evicted from their homes. I think there are like 500,000 people out on the streets now. That number is going to surge by several million. You can't ignore that. That has to be dealt with directly. And if you are indeed trying to get reelected, and that is the topic on the agenda, either the income inequality, either the issue with the cops and the way that people engage the cops, or for that matter, the healthcare thing, of all the things that you as Trump can deal with the most, healthcare, uninsurance, evictions, those are things that will have a massive, massive impact into public perception of you and your ability to do this job. Americans forget pretty quickly. And if it's a situation where it seems like the president has started to do the job, it seems like he's dealing with the unemployment, it seems like he's dealing with the evictions, it seems like he's dealing with issues of income inequality as it pertains to COVID, especially in the context of the racial skew with this particular illness, Donald Trump could win. I don't want you to get into your head that it's impossible for Trump to win. He just can't win doing what he is doing now. And the topics and the conversations that Trump needs to have is to deal with this problem directly and to actually look like a president and give the impression that he cares more about the well-being of the general public as opposed to those of the people stuffing dollars in his G-string. I'll end this here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all. Trump wants to win. You better focus on the priority. Priority is this illness, this disease the well-being of the population itself, not Joe Biden hating God or hating Jesus. Like, share,